I'm Eleanor, and I've been a doctor nearly as long as I've been Richard's wife. We had our ups and downs, but those 30 years flew by like they were nothing. Our house, big and cozy, was always filled with the sounds of life, especially when the boys were young. James and Oliver, our sons, were as different as night and day, yet they both brought their own kind of joy into our lives. Richard and I, both doctors, worked hard to build a comfortable life. We managed to buy a couple of apartments over the years, renting them out for some extra income. Life seemed set on a good path, until the day Richard came home looking pale and more serious than I'd seen in years. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said, his voice grave as he dropped his medical bag by the door. "Had some tests done last week. The results, they came back. It's cancer, Eleanor." The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, and endless waiting rooms. Richard fought hard, but the cancer was merciless. Watching the strongest man I knew wither away was torture. No amount of medical training prepares you for that. One evening, as we sat quietly in the living room, Richard took my hand. "Eleanor, if things don't go our way, you need to make sure everything's sorted with the boys. The will's all done. You'll be fine financially." Not long after, he was gone. The funeral was a somber affair. Family, friends, and colleagues, people came from all over to pay their respects. But it was the quiet at home after everyone left that hit me the hardest. Empty spaces Richard used to fill, his things just where he left them. It hurt to see, to remember. A few days post-funeral, I was in the kitchen trying to make sense of leftover food when James stormed in, his face all twisted up in worry and anger. Oliver trailed behind him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," James said, cutting straight to the chase as he always did. I sighed, setting down the cling film. "Yes, I know. Your father left everything to me. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." James slammed his hand on the counter. "But what about me and Oliver? We're his sons. It's not right that we get nothing now." Oliver piped up, trying to smooth things over. "James, let's not jump into this so hot-headed. Mom's still grieving. We can sort this out without arguing." James shot him a glare. "Easy for you to say. You're not thinking about the future. I am." I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of their stares. "Your father and I built this together. He trusted me to handle things. But I hear you, James. It's not my plan to cut you out." "So, what, then?" James said, crossing his arms, his voice rising a notch. "We just wait until, what? You think it's a good time to give us our share?" "James, watch your tone," I snapped, my patience fraying. "I am still your mother." Oliver stepped between us, his hands up like a referee. "Both of you, please. This isn't helping. Mom, maybe there's a middle ground here?" I nodded, rubbing my temples. "Okay, here's what we can do. The apartments your father and I invested in." "The ones downtown?" James interrupted. "Yes, those," I continued, shooting him a look that told him to zip it for a minute. "I was thinking, you each take one. They're yours to live in or rent out. And from the savings, let's say $25,000 each, to help you get started on whatever you need." James chewed on his lip, clearly doing the math in his head. "And the rest of the stuff? The house, the money? That stays with me. For now. When I'm gone, it'll come to you, as per your father's wishes," I said firmly. James looked like he wanted to argue more, but Oliver nudged him. "Let's think about this, man. It's a fair start. Mom's not leaving us in the cold." James finally nodded, tight-lipped. "Fine. But I want this in writing, Mom. No more surprises." Of course, I agreed. "We'll get everything documented properly." As they left the kitchen, I could hear Oliver hissing at James. "Give her a break, will you? She's doing her best." James muttered something under his breath I couldn't catch, and I didn't really want to. As I washed up the dishes, I wondered if Richard could see us, and what he'd think. I hoped I was doing the right thing, but only time would tell. And time, that tricky thing, wasn't always a friend. It was a sunny afternoon, a rare kind that makes everything seem alright, when James brought Isabella over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but James was already head over heels. You could tell by the way he was fussing over her, which wasn't like him at all. They walked in, and right off the bat, Isabella had this air about her, like she owned the place. Dressed to the nines, she breezed into my living room with barely a hello, her eyes scanning everything. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down without waiting for an invitation. James was grinning like a fool beside her. I forced a smile, trying to be the good host. "Thank you, Isabella. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she replied, then turned to James. "Babe, make sure it's black, no sugar." James nodded and headed to the kitchen. That left me alone with her, sitting in my own living room, feeling like the guest. The silence was awkward until she broke it. "So, James tells me you're pretty well off," she started, eyeing the decor. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know? My parents made sure of that." "That's good to hear," I said, not sure what else to add. James came back with the coffee and handed Isabella her cup. She took a sip and made a face. It's all right. Anyway, we've been discussing our future together. Planning ahead, you know? That's wise, I said, glancing at James, hoping he'd give me some clue about where this conversation was heading. Isabella set her cup down. Yeah, and speaking of planning, we were thinking about the wedding. You know I want something special, James has probably told you. I saw this place, perfect for a rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $30,000. I choked on my coffee. $30,000? Just for the rehearsal dinner? James jumped in. Mom, it's important to Bella. We want to start things off right. I put my cup down, feeling a storm brewing inside. Look, that's a lot of money for a dinner, Isabella. We need to be reasonable. Isabella's face hardened. Reasonable? James says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something that important. James was nodding along with her, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew he was asking too much. I'm all for celebrating, I said, trying to keep my voice even. But $30,000 is beyond excessive. I can't justify that. Isabella stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Eleanor. I was clear with James that I expect a certain lifestyle. James tried to smooth things over. Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground? There's no middle ground on $30,000 for a dinner, James. That's final. I snapped, losing my patience. Isabella picked up her purse, glaring at me. Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to reconsider some things. They left soon after. I sat there, reeling from the encounter. The nerve of that girl, coming into my home, drinking my coffee, and telling me how to spend my money. It felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I wasn't ready for. I was out at the grocery store when James and Isabella decided to drop by again. By the time I got home, Oliver was awkwardly entertaining them in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, the kind that makes you want to turn around and leave, but it was my house, so I braced myself and walked in. Isabella, all dolled up as usual, handed me a list as soon as I set down my grocery bags. Eleanor, we thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've settled on. I hope this will be easier for you to handle. I skimmed the list she first handed me. It was surprisingly sensible: kitchen appliances, some nice china, even a couple of pieces of furniture. This seems quite reasonable, I said, feeling a momentary relief. I think these are wonderful choices. Really? James looked at Isabella, a hopeful expression crossing his face. But just as I was about to discuss where we could buy these items, Isabella's expression changed abruptly. She gasped, "Oh no, this isn't right. Give that back." She snatched the list from my hands and rummaged through her purse, pulling out another sheet of paper. "Here's the actual list." This new list was nothing like the first. It included an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. My jaw dropped. "Is this some kind of joke?" Isabella didn't flinch. "No joke, Eleanor. These are the gifts we expect. Only the best for our wedding." I stared at her, then at James, waiting for him to say something, anything to suggest he didn't agree with this madness. But he just stood there, looking between us, clearly conflicted but silent. I couldn't hold back. "James, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable." Isabella cut in, her voice rising. "This doesn't concern you, Eleanor. You just need to pay up and keep quiet." That's when Oliver stood up, his face set hard. "That's enough, Isabella. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave. Now." The room was thick with tension as James and Isabella gathered their things. Isabella was muttering under her breath, clearly angry. "This is ridiculous. We'll remember this." They left, and the door slammed shut behind them. Sitting down, I felt the weight of the whole situation pressing down on me. Oliver sat beside me, putting an arm around my shoulders. "We'll figure this out, Mom. But you can't let them bully you into giving more than you can, or should. It's not right." He was right, of course. But as I sat there with my son, I couldn't help but worry about James. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was filled with unsaid worries and fears for the future. I knew then that this was far from over. It was only going to get tougher from here. The weeks that followed were a constant barrage of phone calls from James. Each one was more demanding than the last, his tone desperate, almost frantic at times. "Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Bella's family," he'd argue, his voice cracking with stress. "You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here?" I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed against my ear, feeling a knot in my stomach. "James, it's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Bella's expectations, you can't sustain that, not without going into serious debt." He'd scoff, his frustration boiling over. "What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like a beggar. I need more from the inheritance, now." The demand stung. "James, I've offered to cover half the wedding costs up to $15,000 and give a $5,000 gift. That's more than generous. Everything has to be agreed upon with me, though. No surprises." There was a pause, then a sharp laugh from him. "That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me?" "Because it's not just about the money," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "It's about not feeding into this fantasy that's going to ruin you." He yelled now, loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you." And then, just like that, the call stopped. Months passed in silence. I tried to busy myself with daily routines, trying not to worry about James, but the peace was short-lived. The phone rang one afternoon, and it was my sister-in-law, AITA. "Eleanor, I thought you should know." Anita's voice was hesitant, careful. "James is flying all the wedding guests to Hawaii. He sold his apartment to fund it. And he expects you to get there on your own. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping, so..." I hung up, a mix of anger and sorrow churning inside me. How could he be so reckless? Before I could process it all, Oliver came into the room, his expression grim. "Mom, there's something you need to hear." I recorded their conversation when they were sitting here in the living room. He handed me an audio recorder. I pressed play, and the voices of James and Isabella filled the kitchen. "James, your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet. We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her and then cut her off. James's voice responded, chillingly agreeable. Whatever it takes, Bella. I'm not going to let her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear. I turned off the recorder, my hands trembling. To hear my own son speak like that about me, his mother, it was too much. The room spun as I tried to comprehend the depth of his betrayal. Flying to Hawaii was a decision I didn't make lightly. Oliver was by my side, both of us tense but determined to face whatever awaited us. When we landed and approached the venue, I was taken aback by the sheer opulence of it all. Flowers everywhere, lights strung like stars across the evening sky, and music floating in the air. As we walked into the gathering, I spotted James and Isabella mingling with guests. They looked like a picture-perfect couple, all smiles and laughter. My heart ached to see my son so lost in this fabricated paradise. Before I could take another step towards them, Isabella spotted us. Her smile vanished, replaced by a scowl as she marched over, her high heels clicking angrily against the stone pathway. You shouldn't be here, she hissed, stopping just inches from me, her voice loud enough to draw attention. This is my day, and you're not welcome. I was stunned, but before I could respond, her parents, who had overheard, came over. Her father, a tall, stern-looking man, spoke first. Isabella, that is no way to speak to your guest, much less to James' mother. His tone was harsh, a reprimand that made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother, looking equally appalled, turned to me with an apologetic smile. Eleanor, please, come with us. Let's find you a place to sit. They guided us away, leading us to a table at the edge of the setup, clearly an afterthought with no proper setting. The ceremony started soon after, with speeches that felt hollow given the tension. Then, unexpectedly, I was handed the microphone. I stood, my legs shaky, but my resolve firm. I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future, I began, my voice steady despite the trembling inside. But I also believe in honesty and integrity, something that's been sorely missing from the events leading up to this day. Isabella's face went from pink to red, her eyes glaring daggers at me. I was asked for money, time and again, in amounts that no reasonable person would find justifiable. When I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with separation from my family and future grandchildren. My voice cracked a bit, but I pressed on. Oliver, seeing my distress, stepped closer, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. I nodded at him, then turned on the audio recording he had made. Isabella's voice filled the air, cold and calculating, discussing how they would milk more money from me. James' voice agreed, saying he was prepared to leave me with nothing for the sake of his bride. The crowd murmured, the air thick with shock and disapproval. I turned off the recorder, the silence heavy. I gave my son an apartment and $25,000, and yet, it was never enough. Today, I'm making it clear, I will not be treated as an ATM or threatened. I am disowning James and Isabella. I wish them well, but from this day forward, I am choosing to remove myself from their lives. The reaction was immediate. Isabella screamed, her voice shrill and wild. You've ruined my wedding. I curse you. After everything that had happened, coming back home was bittersweet. In the quiet, I made a decision that startled even me. I quit my job. I'd spent years healing others as a doctor, but now, it was time to heal myself and rebuild the life that the recent storms had scattered. Oliver, bless his heart, had just graduated from art college and was brimming with ideas and ambition. With the $25,000 I had given him, he opened his own tattoo parlor. It wasn't just any shop, it quickly became a place where art and skin met in stunning displays. Oliver poured his soul into his work, and it paid off. He started entering tattoo contests, and soon enough, his name was on every local's lips. Before we knew it, he was opening more locations, creating a network of salons that became a hotspot for tattoo enthusiasts. I'd watch him sketch late into the night, his dedication a stark contrast to the chaos his brother had chosen. You're doing amazing, Ollie, I'd say, pride swelling in my chest. It was during these calm months that James reappeared. One afternoon, he showed up at the door, his eyes tired, his shoulders slumped, so different from the ambitious, sharp man he once was. "Mom, I need to talk," he said, not waiting for an invitation to sit. His voice was weary, a far cry from the demanding tone I'd grown accustomed to. I sighed, motioning for him to continue. "What is it, James?" "It's Bella, she's driving me insane. Wants more and more, nothing's ever enough. I got a second job, but it's still not enough for her." His words were desperate, but they couldn't erase the past so easily. "James, I warned you. I told you, living like that, with someone like her, it's unsustainable." He rubbed his face, frustration clear. I know you did, but I thought." His voice trailed off, hopelessness taking the place of explanation. "Thought what? That money would just appear because you wanted it to?" My tone was harsh, but years of pent-up frustration made it hard to soften it. "Look at your brother. He started with the same amount and made something of himself without stepping on others." James bristled. "Yeah, well, not everyone's like Oliver, are they? I have rights to the inheritance too, remember? And when you're gone, it'll come to me." That was the last straw. "Get out, James," I said, my voice cold, resolute. "And don't come back. Not this time. You chose your path." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue more. But then he turned and walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. As I stood in the silence that followed, Oliver came downstairs, having heard the last part of our exchange. "Are you okay, Mom?" I nodded, wrapping my arms around him. "I am now. Thanks to you. Let's just focus on the good we can do, on the life we can build." He hugged me back, his presence a comforting assurance that not all was lost. In that moment, I knew that despite the heartaches, the journey was still worth it. We had each other, and that was enough to keep moving forward. After the storm had passed with James, our home settled into a calm I hadn't felt in years. It was during this quiet period that Oliver brought someone special home. Her name was Sarah, and she was everything Isabella wasn't: kind, humble, and genuinely caring. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship grew stronger, and soon they announced their engagement. The wedding, unlike the extravagant affair that was James, was a simple, heartfelt ceremony in our backyard. Flowers from the garden, homemade decorations, and a small group of close friends and family made the day perfect. During the reception, I pulled Oliver aside. "You've chosen a wonderful woman," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He squeezed my hand. "I learned from the best," he replied, giving me a knowing look. Life moved quickly after that. They sold the apartment I had given Oliver, adding a bit of their savings to buy a small, cozy house just a few miles away. One sunny afternoon, while we were having tea in their new living room, Sarah shared some news. "Eleanor, we're expecting twins," she announced, her eyes shining with excitement. I nearly dropped my cup, overwhelmed with joy. "Twins? Oh, my goodness, that's wonderful." Oliver beamed, his pride evident. "We wanted you to be the first to know. We're really happy, Mom." "Twins," I repeated, letting the words sink in. "Grandchildren." It was a new chapter, one I was eager to start. As for James, news from him was sparse. The last I heard, he had divorced Isabella. She had taken nearly everything in the split, leaving him to start over in another city. Despite the pain he had caused, it hurt to know he was out there somewhere, struggling because of his choices. One evening, as I sat looking through old photo albums, Oliver came and sat beside me. He noticed a picture of James and me from years ago. "Do you ever hear from him?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No. After everything, he's chosen his path, and I have to respect that, even if it breaks my heart." Oliver put an arm around me. "He's still my brother, Mom. Maybe one day, he'll come around." "Maybe," I agreed, not really sure if I believed it. "But for now, we have plenty to keep us busy, especially with those twins on the way." Oliver chuckled. "Yeah, you're about to be the busiest grandma in town." We both laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. Despite the past, despite the mistakes and heartaches, this moment, here with Oliver, felt like everything was exactly as it should be. Life was moving on, and so were we, with new hopes and dreams just on the horizon.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie. making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.